Welcome back to another story on Whispered Tales.
Snow came early to London that year. A damp mist hung over the city like a woolen shawl, settling on rooftops layered one behind another, while the jangle of carriage bells and the cries of evening newsboys mingled in the air like a holiday tune that hadn't yet reached its season. Eleanor Whitmore stood under the awning of a tea room, her dark blue wool cloak wrapped tight around her thin frame, eyes fixed on the flow of people along Holborn. She had missed the last omnibus back to Bloomsbury because of Jonathan Reed's unexpected letter. The legal advisor to the Harrington family had forced her to make a detour to the docks, meet a messenger, then return to the city center. That choice had left the hem of her dress spattered with mud, and her heart splattered with something else, a stubborn sense of unease. In Eleanor's hand was a thick envelope, sealed with red wax and stamped with the impression A.H., the initials of Albert Harrington, the Earl she had met only a few times, and the grandfather she had grown up believing was lost to her. Albert Harrington had died just a week earlier, and all of fashionable London was whispering about a new will, one very different from the version they thought they knew. People said he had secretly altered the most important lines on Christmas Eve the previous year, just after the bells of St. Mary's had struck 12. But that will, according to rumor, had disappeared along with a certain secretary. Gossip was plentiful. The only thing Eleanor knew for certain was what Jonathan had written. Tonight, 8 p.m., the study at Ashdown Manor. Come alone. The truth about the will is not what people think. The tea room clock had just reached 7 when Jonathan Reed stepped through the door, dark-haired, dusted with flakes of snow that had not yet melted. "Miss Whitmore," he said with a slight bow, his voice low and courteous. "If I may, I'd like to take you out to Ashdown at once. Night weather is not to be trusted." Eleanor nodded and drew the envelope closer to her chest. "The letter you had sent to me, what was in it?" Jonathan glanced around and cleared his throat. "Not here. At Ashdown." They left the tea room in a closed carriage. The wheels slid over the thin snow, carving long black tracks in the white. London slid past the fogged window like sketches done in charcoal. Jonathan said nothing more. He seemed to count each breath, as though afraid to disturb something hiding in the brick walls of the city. Only when the carriage turned off the main road and the country lane stretched beneath the arch of trees did he finally speak, his voice lowered. "The will everyone is searching for is not his final word. The Earl left something else behind, something more devious, a series of instructions. If you are who I believe you are, you'll be able to read them." "Why me?" Eleanor turned to him. "Because in every story about Albert Harrington, there's always room for a game. And the last person he chose to trust was a granddaughter who knows how to listen to what is not being said." Jonathan's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "And because, on the Christmas Eve when you were 13, you solved a code hidden in an old Bible and kept the Whitmore family library from being marked for seizure. I'm not mistaken about you." Eleanor fell silent. Memories of her mother came rushing back, of freezing nights huddled by the stove, of book pages that smelled of dust and damp, of that strange treasure of words no one seemed to believe existed. Her mother had been gone for years, and that story had become a private legend. Yet Jonathan knew it. Eleanor tightened her grip on the envelope. Ashdown Manor emerged as the carriage passed through the iron gates, a vast block of gray stone, with sweeping verandas like frozen waves and tall windows glowing faintly gold. The house had a solemn air, but not quite a mourning one. Instead, the atmosphere felt held in suspension, like a breath of fog that refused to dissipate. A servant opened the door and bowed them into the entrance hall, where a red carpet ran the length of the floor between 2 rows of beeswax candles. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their faded eyes looking down as if they had grown tired of watching. "Miss Eleanor," a deep voice called. From the head of the staircase, Charles Whitmore, her cousin, though she barely knew him, appeared with the confident gait of a man used to boardrooms and private carriages. Charles offered a thin smile. "At last, you've arrived. Jonathan, thank you for bringing our honored guest home." Eleanor inclined her head politely. Charles wore a tailcoat and a boutonniere of frosted white flowers. There was something overly polished about him, like a gleam of steel beneath velvet. "I came at Mr. Reed's invitation," she said. "Mr. Reed did what was necessary," Charles replied, his gaze flicking to the envelope in her hand. Now, if you please, we all want to know the truth." From the moment she had stepped inside, Eleanor had been aware of another presence in the shadows, a young woman in a simple black dress, eyes clear and bright as morning dew. "I'm Nora," the girl said with a small curtsy when Eleanor came near. "A maid here at Ashdown, if you need anything." "Thank you, Nora," Jonathan cut in gently. He led Eleanor down the hall toward a carved wooden door, the Earl's study. A black ribbon still hung above the frame. Jonathan unlocked the door, and three of them, Jonathan, Eleanor, Charles, stepped inside. Nora slipped in behind them and closed the door. The study was large, its walls paneled in oak. Firelight from the hearth threw red fingers of light up the towering bookshelves. Albert Harrington's desk was covered in green leather, and on one corner sat a bronze mantel clock, its steady ticking cutting the air in precise slices. On the desk lay a bundle of papers tied with a dark ribbon, waiting like a patient. Jonathan walked straight to it and carefully loosened the ribbon. "First, I have to be clear," Jonathan began, looking from one to the other. "In legal terms, there is currently only one official will. But, in his final day, the Earl wrote what he called a message of trust, a document with no legal force of its own, unless it leads us to the true final will. That message of trust is why I asked Miss Eleanor to come." Eleanor set her own envelope down beside the file. The double red wax seals shone under the lamp. "And what is this, then?" "That," Charles arched a brow, "is something you received despite having almost no real connection to this family. Blood doesn't need a trumpet to announce itself," Eleanor answered evenly. Jonathan opened her envelope and drew out a thick card, fine Basingwerk paper, the faint scent of dried ink still clinging to it. On the card were 4 lines in sharp, angular handwriting. "When 12 brief chimes lie sleeping inside stone, split Christmas Eve in 2 and seek the silent half. The hand that points is guilty, not just timely. One who reads the Lord will know which door to open." Charles snorted, utterly convoluted. Jonathan did not laugh. He opened the other bundle on the desk and pulled out a copy of the Earl's message of trust. The final lines matched the 4 lines on the card exactly. "The Earl meant for us to start in this very room," Jonathan said, "because only here is there a hand that points, yet doesn't mark the hour. Miss Eleanor." He gestured toward the mantel clock. Eleanor stepped closer. It was a Regency-style clock with a blue enamel face, 2 thin steel hands, and beneath them a relief of an angel lifting a laurel wreath. Her fingers felt suddenly cold as she touched the bronze casing. "The hand that points to guilt." "Perhaps he meant a compass needle," Charles suggested with a shrug. "In that case, there ought to be a compass," Eleanor replied. She leaned in and noticed on the rim of the dial, next to the 6, a tiny scratch, as if someone had deliberately scored the surface. Aside from that mark, the enamel border was flawless. This scratch, as if it's a deliberate fault. The minute hand passes it every hour. She tried the glass cover over the dial. To her surprise, the edge shifted slightly. A narrow slit appeared just below the 6. Nora, still standing near the door, gasped softly. Charles stopped smiling. Eleanor slipped a fingernail into the gap and drew out a thin wooden panel, a hidden compartment. Inside was a slender strip of paper, rolled and tied with thread. Jonathan handed her a letter opener. She cut the thread, and he spread the paper flat on the desk. On it was a simple drawing, a sketch of the study, with 4 small dots marking the corners of the room and a cross at the position of the eastern bookcase. Beneath it, one more line. "Split Christmas Eve in 2 and seek the silent half." "Split Christmas Eve," Jonathan murmured. "It might mean midnight. Divide 12 by 2 and you get 6. Or it could mean dividing the night between celebration and prayer," Eleanor said. "One half noisy, balls and parties, the other half quiet, the chapel." All of them turned to look at the large painting on the eastern wall, an oil canvas of Ashdown Chapel at night, its doors closed, candlelight dim behind the windows. It hung above the bookcase like a painted doorway. Eleanor walked toward it, a prickle running along her spine. She ran her hand along the frame. At the bottom edge were 2 small screws. One of them was new, still bright. She twisted lightly, and the frame rattled, then shifted aside, revealing a small, neat keyhole. "There's no key," Charles said, coming closer, his voice rougher now. Perhaps one who reads the Lord will open it, Eleanor replied. Reading the Lord means reading scripture. She turned back to the desk, where a large black Bible lay, the King James Version, its gilt edges worn. She opened it. The pages rustled like faint, invisible whispers. Jonathan and Charles stood a little back, watching. Eleanor flipped past the front matter, genealogies, psalms. In the Gospel of Luke she paused, the Christmas story. An old red ribbon marked chapter 2, the passage where the shepherds hear the angel's news. In the margin, someone had drawn a line down along the first letters of 4 consecutive lines, making the word Noel. Noel, Nora breathed. Split Christmas Eve in 2 and seek the silent half, Eleanor repeated, turning the page. On the next leaf, the paper edge felt doubled, as if 2 layers had been pasted together. She slipped her fingernail between them and peeled them apart. Inside lay a small silver key, its head shaped like a cross. The chapel key, Jonathan said, eyes lighting. Eleanor took the key to the lock behind the painting. It fit perfectly. A soft click sounded, the painting slid aside. Behind it was not a wall, but a shallow recess. Inside sat a walnut box, its lid carved with a Latin phrase, Silentium dimidium veritatis. Silence is half the truth. Your grandfather's little joke, Charles muttered. His voice was like a blade scraping silk. Open it. Eleanor looked briefly at Jonathan, then lifted the lid. Inside, instead of any legal documents, lay an old silver pocket watch, its engraved surface worn faintly smooth. The hands were stopped at exactly 12 o'clock. At the bottom of the box was a small slip of paper. When 12 brief chimes lie sleeping inside stone. What is the stone? Nora asked. The bell tower. Jonathan answered at once. The bell itself is metal, but it's held by a stone structure. The bell sleeps when it's blocked. The chapel has a little bell tower. If we go up there tonight, we will. Charles cut in, as if issuing orders in a meeting. But before we go charging around the estate at midnight, I'd like to know why Miss Eleanor is the one holding that letter. He nodded toward the red-sealed envelope. Who sent it? And why to you? Eleanor's throat felt dry. A sailor gave it to me. Said it was from someone who once owed my mother, Mrs. Whitmore, a favor. Mrs. Whitmore is your mother, Jonathan said slowly. Then perhaps, the missing secretary. The study door flew open, slamming back against the wall. Nora jumped, the silver tray in her hands slipping through her fingers and dropping onto the carpet with a muffled thud. A man stood in the doorway, his overcoat soaked flat with melted snow, his hat rim flecked with white. When he opened his coat, the glint of a police badge showed beneath. Inspector Avery, City Police, he said, his voice level, not loud, but flat as a printed notice. I'm here because of a complaint. Someone forced the lock to the late Earl's study last night. No one spoke for a few seconds. The fire crackled in the hearth, sounding like the walls themselves were whispering. Charles recovered first. Inspector, this is our family office. No one forced anything. We are simply reviewing the estate. Avery's gaze moved calmly from face to face, resting longest on Eleanor and then on the open walnut box. Does reviewing the estate also include items not listed in the inventory? He asked. He stepped forward, pulled on brown leather gloves, and lifted the pocket watch from its nest. Firelight slid over the cold silver. This is the item I've been instructed to secure. By whom? Jonathan asked. By the law, and by an anonymous letter that names one Miss Eleanor Whitmore. Avery's eyes were sharp as glass, not hostile, but cutting. The letter claims she is the only one who can read the Lord, that she will take the watch and vanish from Ashdown before dawn. I have more than enough reason to believe the Harrington estate is being disturbed by a conspiracy. That's a lie, Charles said quickly, but Eleanor felt the blood leave her hands. An anonymous letter had seen into this room before they even set foot in it. Who in the house already knew the chain of clues? Who had been ahead of them all along? Inspector Avery, Jonathan said gently. If you look closely, you'll see there are no signs of breaking or forcing anything. We're following instructions left by the Earl himself. And if you wish, you can come with us to the chapel. Climb the bell tower. You'll see this stone mentioned in that message with your own eyes. You'll see we're hiding nothing. Avery studied the pocket watch, turning the crown lightly between his fingers. He raised one eyebrow. It doesn't run. It's not that it doesn't run, Eleanor said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. It's waiting for the 12 chimes to sleep. When the bell is blocked, perhaps, maybe. She stopped. The word blocked had slipped out and struck something dark in her mind. To block the chapel bell tonight, someone would have to plan ahead. Someone already had. Outside the windows, the snowfall suddenly thickened, as though someone were pouring white powder from the sky. The fire flickered unsteadily. Nora edged back against the wall, fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "Sirs," she said softly, "the housekeeper told us no one is to go out after 9 o'clock tonight. The weather's too bad. But if you have to reach the bell tower, I know a shorter way, through the north corridor. Hardly anyone uses it." Avery glanced at Nora, then at the four of them. "I'll come along," he said at last, "and I'll keep the watch." "You keeping it is no different from any of us keeping it," Jonathan replied. "As long as we all go together." Charles straightened his collar, determination flaring in his eyes. "Then let's go? If Albert's mystery is a chess game, I don't intend to be a pawn left standing." They left the study in an odd procession. A city inspector carrying a piece of evidence, a lawyer bearing a storm lantern, an air full of suspicion, a granddaughter barehanded with a curiosity sharp as a blade, and a maid who knew the hidden ways of the house. The north corridor was as cold as a crypt, wind squeezing through door cracks and stretching into long, thin whistles. The walls were hung with paintings no one remembered, faded faces watching them pass, the eyes in the oil seeming to have absorbed years of damp. "This way," Nora said, pushing open a narrow door hidden behind a curtain embroidered with frost flowers. Behind it was a spiral stair of stone, the steps worn hollow in the center by countless feet. The smell of wet stone and old candle wax rose up to meet them. At each landing was a small round window where snow tapped against the glass like fingernails. "Does anyone still use this way?" Eleanor asked. "The bell ringer," Nora whispered. "And sometimes the Earl." They climbed, the lantern light shivering and painting unsteady streaks on the stone. Avery led, his steps firm and measured, the pocket watch in his coat pocket thumping lightly against his chest. Jonathan followed, one hand shielding the lantern. Charles came behind him, his polished shoes now dusted with stone grit. Eleanor and Nora brought up the rear, their skirts brushing the cold railing. At a dim landing, a gust of wind pushed through some unseen crack, making the lantern falter. Avery raised a hand for them to stop. "Listen," he said quietly. They held their breath. For a moment, there was only the moan of the wind. Then, very faintly, like a breath drawn through clenched teeth, came the sound of metal scraping against metal from somewhere above. Not the ringing of a bell, the sound of someone doing something to the bell. Nora's eyes grew round. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Charles clenched his fists. Jonathan looked up, the lantern tilting and casting light across the curved ceiling, revealing streaks of soot like black writing. Eleanor felt her pulse hammering in her palms. "There's someone up there," she said, without thinking. Avery nodded. "Stay behind me." Slow steps. He drew his truncheon, his other hand settling on the rail. They climbed again, each step carrying them deeper into a story that felt older than any of them, like a church legend where every stair was also a warning. At the final landing, the wooden door to the bell chamber stood slightly ajar. A pale strip of light slipped through the crack, the icy reflection of snow from outside. Avery pressed a finger to his lips and counted silently with his eyes. 3, 2, 1. Then he shoved the door open. The bell chamber was wide, bare, and bitterly cold. The bronze bell hung from its wooden frame, the clapper still as a shadow. On the floor lay scraps of torn cloth, a coil of new rope, and, most disturbing of all, a wedge of granite that had been forced into the space between the bell and its frame, jamming it so the bell could not swing. Next to the wedge stood an oil lamp, still warm, a thin ribbon of smoke curling upward. But there was no one there. "It's been put to sleep in stone," Jonathan said under his breath. Avery strode forward and knelt to touch the wedge. "This was done just now. Whoever did it is still nearby." He straightened and scanned the chamber's dark corners. "Who's there? Show yourself." Silence. Only the wind howled through the gaps, flinging snowflakes inside like handfuls of salt into an open wound. Eleanor suddenly remembered the pocket watch in Avery's coat. "Try it," she said. "If the message is right, once the bell is blocked, the watch will." Avery took out the watch and pressed the crown. There was a sharp little click. The hour hand shivered, then began to move. The watch started to run. Fast, like something that had been held back too long. Snowlight flashed across its face, revealing, in the center, a fine line that appeared as the light passed over it, like the edge of a tiny, closed door in the silver. "There's a secret compartment," Eleanor whispered. "But how does it open?" The answer came from behind them, a short, quiet laugh, cold as mist. A figure stepped out from the shadows near the stair, face hidden by a hood and scarf. In that person's hand glinted a blade, thin and sharp as its own shadow. "You're very good at this," the voice said, low, dry, neither clearly male nor female. "But the old man's game isn't finished yet. Hand over the watch, or let the bell sleep forever." The laugh that rose out of the darkness made them all turn at once. The light of the storm lantern in Jonathan's hand shook, throwing wild shadows across the cold stone walls and stretching the stranger's silhouette long and thin. The hooded scarf covered half the intruder's face, leaving only the eyes visible, sharp as the blade in that gloved hand. Snowflakes swirled in through the gaps, melting the instant they touched the steel. Avery lowered his center of gravity, his grip tightening on the truncheon. "Drop the weapon," he ordered, his voice low but rock steady. "You're trespassing and damaging private property. You keep this up and you're liable to get shot. Don't push it." The stranger kept moving forward. The voice rolled out into the hollow space of the bell tower, echoing back from the stone. "Then shoot, Inspector. Let's see if a bullet can punch through the truth you're all trying so hard to bury." Nora gave a small cry and backed up until she bumped into Eleanor. Charles started forward, but Jonathan threw an arm out to stop him, eyes never leaving the intruder. "Who are you?" Jonathan demanded. "How do you know the Earl's code?" The figure tilted a head slightly, a fleeting smile visible beneath the edge of the scarf. "Because I helped him write his final lines." A chill ran straight down Eleanor's spine. "The missing secretary," she whispered. He smirked, and the knife turned in his hand, catching the lantern light like a flash of lightning. "At last, someone remembers me." Avery didn't wait any longer. He lunged, swinging the truncheon in a hard, controlled arc, but the stranger slipped aside like a shadow. The blade glanced off the inspector's sleeve, leaving a narrow tear. Jonathan dropped the lantern and dove in, tackling the intruder. The two of them hit the cold wooden floor, grappling. Metal clanged in sharp bursts that bounced around the confined space. Eleanor rushed to drag Nora back toward the stair, while Charles grabbed the fallen lantern and tried to steady it, angling the light so they could see. In the struggle, the stranger twisted free, driving a palm into Jonathan's chest hard enough to knock him backward. Then he wheeled, snatching the silver watch from Avery's coat pocket. He held it aloft, a harsh laugh tearing from his throat. "Old Harrington wanted the truth buried with the bell," he hissed, "but I'll let it speak in blood instead." Before anyone could react, he slammed the watch down against the floor. Instead of shattering, it gave a sharp, dry click. The case sprang open. Inside, a delicate mechanism showed itself. Overlapping gold gears and tiny springs, and in the very center, a sliver of paper, rolled tight like a thread. "Don't touch that," Eleanor cried. Too late. The stranger snatched the paper out and stuffed it into his coat. Then he backed toward the bell tower railing. The wind slapped into them, cold and fierce, whipping snow around in spinning gusts. Avery charged, but the boards were slick. His foot slid, and he staggered. Jonathan grabbed the secretary's wrist and yanked, the two of them slamming together against the railing. The wood crackled. The rail split. Both Jonathan and the missing secretary pitched over the edge. Nora screamed. Eleanor ran toward the gap, but Avery caught her arm and hauled her back. "No," he growled. "They've dropped onto the lower bell platform. Don't do anything reckless." She stared down, barely breathing. In the glow of the storm lantern that had rolled to the edge below, she saw one body sprawled motionless, snow already dusting the dark coat. Jonathan lay a few feet away, pushing himself up on one elbow, blood seeping across his forehead. "He's alive," Charles shouted, and started to climb down. At that moment, the bell, heavy and dull, rang out a single deep note. The sound rolled through the tower, long and mournful, like a cry. Everyone jolted. The bell was supposed to be asleep, jammed by the stone wedge. How could it ring? Eleanor looked up. On the bell frame, the granite wedge had worked loose. No one had touched it, but it was slowly rolling away across the planks, as though nudged by an invisible hand. Avery's breath came quick and shallow. Out of here. Now. A second toll boomed out, stronger this time, making the entire tower tremble. Dust sifted down from the vaulted ceiling. Nora panicked. Charles grabbed her by the arm and pulled her toward the stairs. Eleanor didn't move. She was staring at Jonathan, who was now on his knees beside the still figure below. He looked up and shouted something, but the third toll swallowed his words whole. A brief flash lit the chamber, and then every oil lamp in the tower went out at once. Only the cold moonlight remained, pouring through the round openings and across the snow-dusted floor. Eleanor could just make out Jonathan crawling towards something that glinted near the body, the silver watch, still lying open. The instant his fingers brushed it, the watch face glowed with a faint bluish light, and somewhere inside the wall came another click, the sound of a mechanism engaging. Gears began to turn, metal grinding behind the stone. A section of the floor near the bell slid aside, revealing the mouth of a shaft, black and deep. Air gusted up from below, icy and stale, carrying the smell of old candle wax and dusty paper. A hidden passage, Eleanor gasped. The Earl hid the real well down there. Avery grabbed her arm again, trying to hold her. It isn't safe. That floor could go at any moment. But Jonathan had already disappeared into the darkness below. Eleanor tore free and ran to the opening. Jonathan! Her shout bounced off the stone and was swallowed by the dark. Avery cursed under his breath, relit the storm lantern, and followed. Charles and Nora had no choice but to come after them. A narrow stairway led them down into a circular chamber beneath the tower. The walls were draped with cobwebs. Iron sconces ringed the room, and a few candles still burned weakly there, proof that someone else had been in this place not long ago. In the center stood a stone altar, and on it a wooden coffin. Jonathan was beside it, the strip of paper from the watch in his hand. Dried blood streaked his face, and his eyes gleamed in the flicker of the flames. Eleanor hurried to him, her voice catching. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said, "but he's gone. By the time I came to my senses, this passage was open, and he was nowhere in sight. I'm certain he came down ahead of us." Avery moved around the room, lantern held high. "This chamber sits directly under the chapel," he said. He stopped in front of the coffin, tracing the carved name and crest with his eyes. "And this is a false grave for Albert Harrington." Charles let out a low hiss. The old man was mad. He hid his own tomb. Jonathan unrolled the strip of paper. The ink was brown and shaky, the letters slightly trembling on the page. "When the final bell rings, the truth will wake. The one who keeps it must be ready to pay. For silence is half the truth, and the other half is blood." When Eleanor finished reading, understanding struck her all at once. The bell. Each time it rings, it's a signal to unlock something. Each toll sets off a new mechanism. And in the end, she turned to the coffin. "The will has to be inside this." No one argued. Avery lifted the glass of the lantern and gave a brief nod. "We open it." Slowly. Together they pushed the heavy wooden lid aside. It gave way with a groan, and the close smell of resin and age washed over them. But there was no body. Inside lay only a small iron chest. On top of it, a letter sealed in red wax, the same crest as the first envelope Eleanor had received. Jonathan took out his letter opener and cracked the seal. Inside were just a few lines in the Earl's hand. "The person who reaches this place does so not by bloodline, but by wit. Those who come here with greed in their hearts will hear a 13th bell." As Jonathan read the last words aloud, another sound came roaring down from the tower above, the 13th toll, high, sharp, and unnaturally long. The stone shook under their feet, the candles blew out in a rush, and dust poured from the ceiling. "Everyone out. Now," Avery barked. But Jonathan hadn't yet shut the chest. Its lid flew up on its own, throwing off a burst of silvery light. For an instant, Eleanor saw what lay inside, a sheaf of papers wrapped in silk, and an old photograph of a young man standing beside a dark-haired woman. The woman's face looked so much like Eleanor's that it made her stomach twist. The floor cracked. The room heaved. Stone gave way. They heard only the roar of collapsing masonry and the screech of torn metal before the darkness swallowed them whole. Eleanor came to in the wavering glow of torches. Damp air pressed in on all sides, and somewhere in the distance the bell was still tolling, low, warped, as if ringing from the bottom of the earth. Jonathan lay beside her, head bowed but breathing. A few steps away, Avery was struggling to drag Charles out from a heap of rubble. Nora sobbed quietly, her hands chalk-white with dust. "Where are we?" Eleanor croaked. Jonathan looked around slowly. "Another vault, deeper down," he said. "Looks like the old undercroft of the chapel, where the Earl once kept a private archive." He turned to her, his expression a mix of shock and something close to awe. "Eleanor, that photograph in the chest, the woman in it, was your mother." Eleanor went rigid. "My mother never told me she'd ever set foot in Ashdown." Avery straightened up, his face gray with stone dust. "Maybe she was part of this family once. Or maybe she's the reason the will was changed at all." He pulled the silver watch from his pocket. Its faint glow hadn't faded. The hour hand pointed squarely at 13. "This thing doesn't stop anymore." From the far end of the vault, a sound drifted toward them. The slow, dragging rhythm of footsteps. A rough, familiar voice followed, echoing off the stone. "You still don't understand. The will is just bait. The real truth is that everyone has something for the bell to wake." The secretary, the man who had fallen from the tower, stepped out of the darkness, coat smeared with blood, eyes shining with a feverish light. In his hand, the strip of paper he'd stolen was now unrolled. He held it up, and in the torchlight they all saw the final line none of them had read before. "The true heir bears the name Whitmore." The torch shook in Avery's hand, its wavering yellow light crawling over damp stone walls streaked with moss. The smell of dust and cold earth clung to their skin. The secretary, or whatever shadow of him was left, moved toward them in heavy, deliberate steps, the paper in his hand fluttering like a torn banner. One side of his face was split by a long gash running down to his chin, but his eyes blazed with the wild light of a man who holds a truth everyone else is afraid to know. Jonathan stepped in front of Eleanor, one hand gripping a broken iron bar, the other steadying her. "Stop right there," he barked. "What do you want? Money? Or are you just trying to burn the Harrington name to the ground?" The secretary gave a rough, rattling laugh, his voice echoing through the vault, tangled with the distant tolling of the bell that still sounded like a restless spirit. "Money? No," he said. "I had it once and lost everything with it. As for Harrington's honor," his lip curled, "that rotted the day he turned the name Whitmore into a servant's badge, the day he denied his own daughter." Eleanor froze. The sounds around her seemed to drain away. "His daughter?" she whispered. "You mean the Earl's daughter?" "Yes." He bit off the word, lifting the paper. "The real will has only two conditions. First, everything passes to the one who carries Whitmore blood. Second, if that person cannot be found, the inheritance goes to the one who witnesses and protects this secret until the 13th bell." He gave a low, broken laugh. "I was the only one he trusted, until he changed his mind and decided to bury me with the truth." Jonathan shook his head. "The Earl would never." "Never." The secretary cut in, laughing hoarsely, the sound bouncing off the stone. "He was a hypocrite in a gentleman's hat. When he learned that the woman he loved was your mother, a poor Whitmore, he tried to erase everything. But that feeling didn't die. He rewrote the will, gave it to me to guard, and then he panicked. He wanted it destroyed. I refused. And from that day, I was the hunted one." Firelight picked out Eleanor's face, eyes wide, heartbeat pounding against her ribs. "My mother lied to me," she murmured. "She always said she was just a maid in the Harrington household." Jonathan's hand tightened gently on her shoulder. His voice was low but steady. "Eleanor, you don't have to believe him. He's not in his right mind." "No," the secretary shouted. "I'm the witness. You are the true heir. Your blood is the missing half of the truth. He jabbed a finger toward Jonathan, is the man of the law they hired to scrub the record clean. And Charles, he's nothing but a counterfeit heir, living off sins he didn't commit." Charles stepped forward, his face chalk white. "That's enough. Say one more word and—" He didn't finish. The secretary pulled a small black pistol from inside his coat, the barrel swinging up to point straight at Charles's chest. "Just one bullet," he said softly, "to end a rotten line." "Don't!" Avery shouted, leaping forward. The shot cracked through the vault, bouncing from wall to wall. Smoke bloomed thick in the air. Charles staggered and fell, clutching his chest, crimson blooming across his white shirt. Nora shrieked and dropped to her knees beside him. Eleanor clutched her head, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Avery tightened his grip on the truncheon and brought it down in a hard arc. It struck the secretary's wrist. The gun flew from his hand and skittered across the stone floor. Jonathan snatched it up and flung it aside. But the secretary still didn't stop. He laughed, coughing up blood. "You think you can stop this? The 13th bell has already rung. The game is over." Then he pulled something else from his coat, a small brass timer, its second hand ticking perilously close to zero. Jonathan swore under his breath and lunged, knocking him back, but the man only laughed harder, lifting the device. "Silence is half the truth," he rasped. "The other half is the explosion." He started to press the trigger, but Eleanor, in a burst of blind panic, snatched the iron bar from Jonathan's hand and hurled it. It struck his wrist. The device flew from his grasp and clattered to the floor. Avery dove for it, scooped it up, and fumbled with the dial. "Good Lord," he muttered. "There's dynamite in these walls." Jonathan cocked his head, listening, and heard it too, a strange, ticking rhythm behind the stone altar, deep and steady. "He's wired the false tomb." There was no time to think. "Everybody out," Avery barked. "Move." Jonathan grabbed Eleanor and ran. Nora struggled to lift Charles, who was still breathing but weak. Avery swung in beside her, helping drag him along. The secretary remained where he lay, laughing like a man already dead. "Run, Whitmore," he called. "Take your name into the sunlight while you still can." They raced up the underground steps, the cold breath of the earth chasing at their heels. The ticking behind them grew faster and faster. Avery scrambled ahead, shouting over his shoulder, "Faster! When the bell stops, it goes off." The passage up toward the tower was narrow, the floor already cracked from the earlier blast. Wind and snow poured in through gaps, snuffing at the lantern flame. Jonathan braced one hand on the wall and guided Eleanor in front of him. For a heartbeat, she looked back. The secretary was still on the vault floor, head raised, smiling at her. The smile of a man who had chosen fire over confession. White light burst behind them. The shock wave hurled them off the steps. When Eleanor came to, her whole body tingled with numb pain. Overhead, the sky was growing pale with dawn. Snow still fell, but the clouds were brushed with pink. In the distance, Ashdown Manor lay in the valley, the bell tower now half gone, black smoke curling up into the morning air. Beside her, Jonathan was sitting up, his hand streaked with blood. Avery was leaning over Charles, while Nora wrapped a strip torn from her skirt around his chest. Charles was breathing, shallow but steady. "We're alive," Eleanor whispered, her breath puffing in the cold. Avery nodded. Part of the tower collapsed. "The charge went off early, likely thanks to that throw of yours. If it had gone at full force, he let the sentence die." Eleanor glanced around. "What about him, the secretary?" Jonathan stared toward the distant pile of broken stone and smoke. "No one could survive under that," he said quietly. She was silent for a moment. In her hand, a strip of silk still remained, the covering from the iron chest. It had torn free when the floor gave way. Wrapped inside was half a bundle of yellowed papers. She unfolded them. The pages were brittle with age, but the ink was clear. Last will and testament of Albert Harrington, original. She handed it to Jonathan, her voice tightening. "This is real." He took it, scanned the opening lines, and froze, eyes widening. "Eleanor, listen to this." He read aloud. "I, Albert Harrington, hereby acknowledge Eleanor Whitmore as my lawful granddaughter, the only child of Amelia Whitmore, my illegitimate daughter. All property, lands, and titles of the Harrington estate shall pass to her upon her 25th year, provided she proves herself worthy, not by blood, but by kindness of character. Guardian and witness, Jonathan Reed." Eleanor lifted her head, eyes shimmering. "Jonathan, you?" He looked away for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, he entrusted me with that role from the beginning. But I was forbidden to reveal it until you opened the final door yourself." She took a step back, trembling, anger and hurt crashing together inside her. "You knew all along? You led me into this game." "No," he said quickly, his voice rough. "I only knew the first part. I had no idea there would be explosives, blood, any of it. I just wanted you to know who you really are." Avery cut in, his tone firm. "This isn't the moment for blame. Miss Whitmore, this document has to reach the court before anyone else, like Charles's estate advisors, tries to intervene. If it doesn't, it may vanish like the last one." Charles groaned and blinked his eyes open. "No need for a court," he whispered. "I recognize her. Eleanor is the heir. I just wanted to hold on to what little honor we had left." He managed to grasp her hand before slipping back into unconsciousness. Eleanor looked down at his hand, feeling a heavy mix of pity and sorrow. On the other side, Nora sobbed softly. "He isn't a bad man," she said. "He just grew up trapped inside the Harrington name." The sky brightened. A nearby church bell began to ring, not sharp and haunting as the night before, but low and gentle. Each chime seemed to wash away a layer of smoke, leaving behind the fragile warmth of survival. Eleanor gazed up at the ruined tower, then spoke quietly. "Silence is half the truth. The other half is the choices we make." Jonathan stepped closer and rested a hand on her shoulder. "What will you choose, Eleanor?" She tightened her grip on the wheel, the wind tugging at her soot-streaked hair. "I'll keep Ashdown," she said. "Not as a trophy, but as a place to prove that the Whitmores and Harringtons were once one family, and that we've finally paid the price." Avery nodded. That's the answer he was waiting for. Far off, smoke still rose in thin threads from the rubble of the bell tower. No one noticed that in the ashes, a silver pocket watch lay half buried, its hands crawling forward until they stopped at exactly 12:30. In the pale morning light, it gave one last faint tick, as if to say the story wasn't quite finished. The morning after the explosion, London lay wrapped in a thick, murky fog. From the ridge above the valley, Ashdown Manor sat hushed in the snow, a portion of its tower sheared away, a thin breath of smoke still curling up like the last exhale of someone just waking from a fever dream. Eleanor stood at an upstairs window, the housekeeper's wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Wind slipped in through the cracks, icy and sharp, carrying the faint smell of smoke and melted wax. From here, she could see the servants clearing rubble and a few city officers taking notes as they moved about the site. They worked quietly, as if afraid of disturbing whatever past lay buried underneath the ruin. A day ago, she had been only Eleanor Whitmore, a poor tutor renting a room in Bloomsbury, paying her way with lectures and careful copies of old texts. Now that name was fastened to the Harrington family, to a vast estate, and to a tragedy no one wanted to touch. She touched her throat where the blast had left a faint scrape. Images from the night still spun behind her eyes. The 13th bell, the flash of the explosion, Jonathan shouting her name through smoke, the secretary's face swallowed by fire and stone. Behind her, Jonathan's low voice broke the silence, gentle as if he feared startling her. "You're still awake?" Eleanor turned. He stood in the doorway, his shirt stained with dried blood, a bandage wrapped around his arm. He looked exhausted, but there was a clear steadiness in his eyes, the look of a man accustomed to carrying responsibility. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "Ashdown doesn't seem ready to rest. I hear the wind whistling through the gaps in the tower. It sounds like the bell is still ringing." Jonathan gave a faint smile and walked closer. "There's no bell left to ring. The police have sealed off what's left of the tower. They say the explosion destroyed the mechanism entirely." Eleanor stared down at her hands. "And yet I still hear it." "It may be memory," Jonathan said. "Or what the Earl wanted you to keep listening to." She turned to him, her expression sharpening. "What do you mean by that?" He slowly drew something from his pocket, the silver pocket watch. It was dented now, the casing scorched, but still intact. "Avery found it in the debris," he said. "It doesn't stop at 12:30 anymore." The hand moved another half-minute. "One of the inner gears has an inscription." He opened the case. Inside, among the scratches, a small line of engraving showed faintly. 14. When the 14th bell rings, silence ends. Eleanor stared. The 14th bell? That's impossible. He only ever mentioned 13. Maybe 13 wasn't the end, Jonathan said, his voice dropping. Maybe he left one more layer to the game, just for you. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the snow began to fall more thickly, softening the cracks in the roof and smoothing out the broken lines. In the half-light of the room, their shadows stretched across the floor, overlapping like two timelines searching for a point to meet. "Do you regret it, Jonathan?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated, then let out a slow breath. Regret? Yes. I regret not telling you sooner. Not warning you that Albert's truth was always a double-edged blade. He tried to test people's honesty with lies. And I became the one cut by that blade, she said, bitterness touching her voice. What about Charles? Is he still alive? Jonathan nodded. Avery's with him. The bullet grazed a rib, but didn't hit anything vital. With rest, he should recover. Eleanor exhaled in relief, though sadness flickered in her eyes. He doesn't deserve to pay for his ancestors' sins. None of us do, Jonathan replied. But now you're the only one who can change what happens next. The Earl left you more than money. He left you a chance to redeem both families' names. She looked back out the window, the dim winter light reflected in her gaze. I'm afraid I'm not strong enough. I've never lived in their world, banquets, politics, polite lies. I only know how to teach and write quiet sentences. Maybe that's exactly why he chose you, Jonathan said, stepping a little closer. He knew only someone untouched by power could be trusted to hold it. His voice was warm, but there was a tug of guilt deep in his eyes. For the first time since they met, Eleanor saw him not just as a cool-headed lawyer, but as a man trying hard to keep his feelings under control. I trust you, she said quietly, but I don't know that I've forgiven you. He pressed his lips together and lowered his head. I won't ask for your forgiveness, Eleanor. Only, let me stay. Let me help you put this in order. At least until the 14th bell rings. She said nothing. The wind sighed at the window. Then came a knock at the door, 3 slow, deliberate taps. Avery entered, carrying a stack of sealed papers. Miss Whitmore, the city police will need your statement tomorrow morning, he said. These are the temporary inventory reports for Ashdown. He laid another envelope on the table. And this arrived first thing, no return address. Eleanor looked at the envelope, her pulse jumping. Red wax seal, stamped with H, just like the very first letters. She broke it open and read the shaky brown ink. My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the 13th bell has rung, and fire has burned away the worst of the lies. But don't be too sure I've left this world behind. A part of me remains. In the one room at Ashdown no one dares to open. When the clock's hand reaches 14, seek the place where the light never goes out. Albert H. Eleanor clenched the letter, her face paling. Jonathan watched her. The room no one dares to open, he said softly. Could be the old wine cellar. Or the East Wing library. I thought part of the East Wing burned, Avery said, frowning. Not all of it, Eleanor answered. The basement level survived. The Earl used to call that room the Chamber of Light, because there's a window that always catches the sunrise. Avery sighed. If he left more evidence, or more tricks, we'd better find it before the authorities seal this place from top to bottom. But you need rest. Eleanor shook her head. No, if I wait, the 14th bell may ring on its own, and this time, who knows what it will wake up. Jonathan looked at her with a mix of worry and respect. You've changed, Eleanor. You're not the trembling schoolteacher in the tea shop anymore. She gave a faint smile, one weighed down by someone who knew there was no going back. Maybe, but I don't intend to become another Albert, either. I'll discover the truth, and then I'll let it rest. Avery nodded and turned toward the door. I'll get lanterns and a map of the East Wing. We go at dusk. Jonathan stayed where he was. When the door closed, it was just the two of them, the dim light tracing their profiles. If there's anything left unsaid, he murmured, it might be about your mother. I don't think she was just someone the family rejected. She may have been the last guardian of his promise. Eleanor's eyes darkened with sadness. You think my mother was part of all this? Not a game, Jonathan said. A promise that never got fulfilled. By late afternoon, the snow had stopped. A thin winter sunlight washed the ruins in a cold gold. The three of them, Eleanor, Jonathan, and Avery, made their way into the shattered east wing of Ashdown. Walls were split open, beams charred black where the fire had caught. Yet beneath the rubble, a narrow corridor remained intact, sloping down to the old cellar level. The air smelled of old wine and forgotten years. Eleanor walked in front, her lantern casting a dull circle of light along the mossy wall. At the far end of the corridor stood a heavy iron door, locked with a tarnished brass hasp. Across the metal, half-faded Latin words were carved. Lux numquam deficit. Light never fails. She took the small silver key from her pocket, the same one she'd once used in the study. It slid into the lock as if it had always belonged there. With a dry click, the latch turned. The door swung inward. A gust of cold air rushed past them. They lifted the lanterns, and all three of them stopped. In the center of the room sat a stone table. On it stood a round crystal vessel, glowing with a faint golden light as if lit from within. Inside the glass was a coiled strip of recording tape from an early talking machine, labeled in faded ink, Christmas, 1874. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she reached out. Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper. "A recording from the Earl? Or from my mother?" she said. Avery checked the corners, scanning for traps, for wires, anything. There was nothing. No explosives, no ticking, only the heavy hush of the room. "If this is what he meant by the light that never goes out," Avery said, "then this is it, the last word. Or the confession he never gave." Eleanor rested her palm on the lid of the glass and gently lifted it. A soft hiss of air escaped, then silence again. She looked at Jonathan. "We'll listen to it," she said, "when the 14th bell rings." He nodded. "When will that be?" She glanced up at the clock on the wall. The minute hand had just slipped past the 1. "An hour to midnight," she said. Outside, the wind picked up, threading itself through the broken arches like the distant echo of a bell. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered, "This time, I'll be the one to ring it."